Hello everyone and welcome back to another competitive balance analysis for the BBFL. I'm your host Ethan Leach. As you know, only maybe 3 people ever watch this, so let's go ahead and jump right in. We're going to start, as we always do, with our playoff statistics. In the pinkish blocks here, you'll see seeds that saw action this year, and then on the left side in pink, we see this year's performances. So we saw the 6 and the 5 seed advance into the semifinals this year, and the 1 and the 2 seed duke it out in the Benny Bowl, with Tuck, the number 2 seed, taking me down, the 1 seed, moving the 2 seed to 3 and 1 all time in the Benny Bowl, and the 1 seed to 5 and 2 all time in the Benny Bowl. Some stats for the different matchups here. The number 1 seed remains undefeated against the number 6 seed. We saw that this year. They are now, where did that go? Where's the 6? Where am I? 4-0, yep. 4-0 all time against the 6 seed. So, bad time to be a 6 seed in the league. In gold here, the matchups we see every year, obviously balanced out. The new number 1 position is the 1 seed, no shock there, with a 21-9 record and a win for a win percentage of 0.7, followed by the 2 seed at 16-12 overall, just over 500, and then the 5 and the 6 seed actually tie for third at 500. The 5 going 12-12, and the 6 going 13-13. This was also the first ever matchup between the number 1 and the number 2 seed in the championship, or ever, for any playoff game that has, championship connotations. And I'm just checking my notes here. As we scroll on down, we have our first round stats. You can read those up there. That's a little graph for that. In the championship hangover section, Chase was not able to three-peat here. He lost in the first round to me, who ended up as Benny Bowl runner-up. So now Tuck Heavy is the head that wears the crown. So we'll see what happens to him in 2026. The updated manager records. We have added Ryan Mendez Tucker to the championship list. I usually make that one pink to match up at the top, but it doesn't show up well on the brown. So we've got that there. Margin of victory has now been updated as well to this year with 74 points. That one kind of stings. And you see a little bit of some of the stuff I'm looking at to maybe add in the future. Seed winning droughts is the really painful one. The 4 seed continues its 5-year drought without seeing a playoff win, followed closely by the 3 seed since 2024, the 8 seed since 2021, the 7 seed since 2023, and the 3 seed since 2024, last time they won those. Over here, I've got whether the 06 or the E6 won the championship. It's obviously a little biased since the 06 has been around so much more often. The 06 has won the Benny Bowl 86% of the time. It's not a very surprising stat, but you know how it is. These continue to be true. The Benny Bowl, the 6 or the 7 seed has never won the Benny Bowl. They're 0-7 now. And the 5 seed is now 2-0 in Benny Bowls, despite not winning a playoff game since 2020. And a couple things I had pop up in my head the other day to also chart manager playoff win droughts, and then maybe manager playoff droughts in general of missing the playoffs. And then over here, Benny Bowl records, I was just going to list each manager, their win-loss in their Benny Bowl. So how many times they've been versus how many times they've won. Nothing super crazy over here this year. We had the 1-2 as a Seedagami. Checking my notes. Looking back at the Kingslayer, only 3 Benny Bowl champs have made it back the next season, and they're 1-2 in the Benny Bowl. All right, time for the really nitty-gritty stuff. The competitive balance for the year 2025. On the left, you'll see everybody's wins and their win percentage and their average margin of victory, either plus or minus. It's just over. That's where they end up over the year. Our standard deviation for a win analysis, again, standard deviation is just how far apart from the mean measurably. Go watch the top 10 video to get a better explanation of that. Ideally, we'd want that to be around 0.134. We're at 0.168, so we're a little higher than last year. And, usually in line with most years. Nothing crazy there. We have our non-Scully competitive balance measure of a 1.25. A reminder that in an ideal world, a league's NSC would be 1, meaning the league was perfectly balanced in terms of win-loss. So this is one way to analyze win-loss across the league. The farther from 1.00 the NSC is, the more distance between the top and the bottom of the league. So we have an NSC of 1.25, the highest since the 2018 season. And I'll get into that later. The standard deviation is 1.68, a little higher, but we had 2 teams hit double-digit wins, and we had 3 teams under 6 wins. So we get a big spread there. Let me see what else is in my notes. Margin of victory, standard deviation was 13.63. In an idealized world, that would be 0, because all teams would be perfectly even as things should be, and everything would be a tie. Average margin of victory this year was a 28.71, a dip from last year and the year before and the year before. It's the lowest in the 2020s so far. We had 4 teams with an average margin of victory of plus 10 and 5 teams under of 10 or under or more. And we'll look at that on the next slide, it looks like. Our average points per game stood at 130.6, ended up at 130.6. Same as last year and 10 points higher than 2023. So another continued year of high scoring in the BBFL. Looking over at the margin of victory, in my little eyeball test, the biggest turnaround of the year, I'm going to give to Sam King. Started out 1-3, went 8-2 from there after the first third of the season, and ended at 9-5. The biggest crash out was Ian starting 3-1, and then going 1-9 from there and finishing at 4-10. Here is every team's net points. That's your total. That's I add up all your points, and I add up all your opponent's points, and then we basically combine them to see how much further you were ahead. And each team's average point differential and some standard deviation there. Here's where we get our average margin of victory of 28.71. That's all we have for here on my notes. Heading over to the EAF and strength of schedule. A reminder of my notes. A reminder of what the EAF value is I took an adaptation of the simple rating system developed by Pro Football Reference, and it's calculated as the difference between a team's average margin of victory and their strength of schedule. So a higher an EAF value, the easier their path to the postseason was. It's also could be seen as a combination of team performance and luck. The lower the strength of schedule, the easier a team's opponents were on average. And there's a little definition from the SRS if you want to see that. Here's everyone's strength schedules. In the future, I might add a separate column to normalize this on a scale of like 1 to 100, so it's easier to gauge against each other. But I need these raw data values to actually calculate the EAF value, which is, again, a thing that I made up. Competitive balance in playoffs, this is another thing that I just straight up made up. I take the seed and I put in where it finished. So the 1 seed was second, the 2 seed was first, etc., etc. And then I basically just tally the. I use this math. You want to pause and actually read it to figure out, just how chaotic the year was. So more upsets, the further the further that the low seeds go and the shorter that the high seeds go, we'll bump that EAV value up. We had an EAV of 0.31, which is, hovering a little above the minimum. So it's, nothing too crazy was this year, especially the first time we've seen the 1 and the 2 meet in the playoffs. And then jumping back here, this chart I have organized by ETH value instead of by wins. So it's a little different from there to there. And then we organize top to bottom just based off ETH. So you'll see, for example, my ETH value of 41.73 because I had a much higher than average margin of victory, a pretty high above zero margin of victory, I should say, a pretty favorable strength of schedule, and a lower points against per game of my opponent's scoring against the average, the league average, versus a, significantly higher points for a game above the average. So that's why we see me so high. Stu, similarly, his schedule was fairly easy, and he scored his opponents were scoring just under, and he's scoring way over. Versus all the way down here with someone like the Commish, who has a very negative ETH value. He is losing by his margin of victory of loss, I should say, was the largest in the league by a little chunk, with a stronger strength of schedule, and was giving up way more points above the average than the rest of the league just by happenstance. So that's how you read that. All these files will be linked in the description, obviously, so you guys can dig around as you please. We got graphs. Graphs on graphs on graphs. Here's our regular season win-loss over time. If you're having trouble finding your line in there, it's probably covered up on the same exact angle as someone else. So it'll be easier if you download it and look at it yourself. We got win-loss over time. This is just your win percentage. A little more, where's my mouse? A little more spread out this year as compared to last year, though we had the same lows, not nearly as high of highs. So from here to there. I can scoot over a little bit, I think, for the cropping. Single season scoring over time, we see that we continue this high level of average scoring. We obviously had the exact same this year, or about the same for those parts. So I would consider this a continuation of our upward swing in scoring we've seen since 2022. This point of 1644 moving up to 1827. And, obviously you are here organized by color. Keys down here at the bottom. Your color on each graph across this whole document is color coordinated. So I am always purple, Chase is always blue, Stu is always green, etc., etc. So pretty tight scoring amid everybody again this year. That's another continued trend. 2022 is last time we saw a real difference between people. Here's the behemoth, the below 500 all time. If you win a game, that counts. And my definition of counting is regular season and the playoff bracket outside of the consolation bracket. So if you win a game in the playoffs and then fall out of the playoffs, the rest of those games don't count for me. Get over it. And I'll show the other graph here. Some upward trends for myself. I forgot to check my notes, see if there's anything over here. Jump back to single season really quick. We had a mid-max in the single season this year of 361 points down to So the mid-max is 361 points this year. So the highest, the difference between the highest and the lowest. That came out to 361 points, down 25 points from last year, and 48 points from 2023. So we are tightening up as a league in regular season scoring of late. So here, this also helps on above below. Zooming in, you can get a better look at your dots. So we've had a good year progress for myself. For I think it's Makita, right? Yeah, for Makita. for Ryan, obviously. A big downward year for the commish. For who's that orange? For Ian, not a great year there. Pretty average Benny Bull slump of record out of Chase. And in yellow, Sam had a pretty good upward year. But yeah, you can see those further in depth as you like. I bring this chart out as well. No shade to current BBFL champion Tucker. It's just without his data, it's easier to view everything. Just to get a clip. There's less overlap because our minimum Y value is now minus 22 instead of, what is this? Minus 58. Yeah, better look at how the year shook out, minus of course Tucker. Hop over to Benny Bull differential. I can't get this number to show up, but once it expands next year, the number will show up. But the value is 146 because I got my rear end just smacked in the playoff and on Benny Bull. And now for the newest edition, that's the wrong thing. And for the newest edition of our competitive balance, it is the WAR update. This is 2025. Top standout this year was Matthew Stafford with a WAR of 6.2, averaging 30.2 points per game. But we also had Drake May and Josh Allen averaging 28, Trevor Lawrence averaging 27, and the league average is 25.7. So all these guys were in a good posture here. At wide receiver, we had Puka Nacua with a WAR of 7.1, followed closely by Jackson Smith and Jigba with a WAR of 6.7. Two outstanding years. And they get a little bit of separation from the group here, but you've got Nacua, Smith, and Jigba, Sun God, and Jamar Chase all scoring over 300 points on the season. They're all going to cluster well there. We're going to jump down the tight ends. Look at Trey McBride, who I really thought was going to be maybe the best tight end performance of all time. Did I make it on that? Yeah. He actually didn't really stack up that well. But a WAR 5.8 for a tight end is nothing to sneeze at. But I wanted to save CMC for last. Christian McCaffrey scored 471 fantasy points in our league this year, averaging 27.7 fantasy points, and a WAR of 9.4 for Chase, which comes out to be the ninth greatest performance, in BBFL history, bumping 2024 Lamar Jackson off the list, and he's still only the third best buff player to ever grace our fantasy screens. Here's everybody's best WAR this year. Mine was Devon A. Chan. No shock there. None of these are really shocking names. Shout out to Ryan's best this year, best player by WAR being Trey McBride and winning a championship. I wanted to play this out a little bit here to see how CMC stacked up against his competition, because he obviously had the most fantasy points. He had 102 receptions, which led all running backs. 924 receiving yards, leading all backs, 7 receiving touchdowns, 54 receiving yards per game, again leading all running backs. While not topping the rushing yards and not topping rushing touchdowns or rushing first downs, but most overall touchdowns and not even the most yards from scrimmage. He had 1,200 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns, 71 first downs. That's my wrong sticky note. I had a note and I lost it. Here it is. He was eighth overall in yards, 10th overall in touchdowns, 4th overall in first downs, and 11th in yards per game. When then you flip it around and look at, I want to look at him as a receiver. I put our top two receivers, Smith and Jigba, and Nacua, as comparison for some of those receiving numbers. Had CMC just lined up as a wide receiver this year, and we erased all his running back numbers, he would have been 7th in receptions, 23rd in total yards, a tie for 6th in total touchdowns there, and 37th in yards per game, which would be a pretty pedestrian running back performance. But couple that with, or I'm sorry, a pretty pedestrian wide receiver performance. Couple that with a pretty good running back performance, and you get a true dual threat player. And the first year I can think of it forever that he's actually, I feel, was healthy the whole year. So this is what he's capable of when he's, on the field the whole time. So that is 2025. Here's the chart. There's, there's CMC all there by himself. Here's, here's Trey McBride. Good separation from them, but overall, it's just, tight ends just don't bring that much to the table. Here's our updated top 10 list of all time. He now jumps to, did I say? I said the wrong thing. That is actually the 7th best WAR of all time at 9.4. Did I write the right number there? Yeah, 9.4. It's actually the 7th best of all time. It still knocks off Lamar Jackson, obviously, but that puts him above the legs of Jamal Charles, David Johnson, and Satan. So congrats to Chase to adding a 3rd jewel in his crown for the best of all time. Here is the best WAR by manager. I'm going to clean this up at some. Well, actually, no. These are in blue are on the top 10 all-time list. In yellow are players from this year. So Noah's new GOAT is Bijan Robinson with 8.2. And then this is our best player in manager history that isn't in the top 10 all time. So your best player off the list is going to be over here. And lastly, looking at our top 5 players by manager, Noah's new GOAT, as I said, is Bijan Robinson with a WAR of 8.2. Where's Noah? That's his only real contribution to the chart this year. Bryce, Chase, Sam, Caleb, Makita, Noah, and Stu all had new top 5 additions. Bryce got the add in Puka Nacua at number 5, Chase at CMC at number 3. Sam had Jonathan Taylor in 3rd. Kayla with James Cook the 3rd and 4th. That's confusing. I said Noah. Makita had Sun God at his 5th best player of all time, and Dr. Michael Stewart had Jahmyr Gibbs put in his 2nd best performance of all time with an 8.0. And that's about it. That's about all we got for competitive balance this year. And everything else, I'm doing one quick look at my notes. Yeah, it's gonna be much quieter now that I have that video out of the way, that monstrosity of a video. But I'm glad that I got good reception, that you guys enjoyed it. Not really much up on the horizon for the in the coming future. I'm just enjoying not having that project looming the whole time. So I'll get back around to doing something. I have a couple ideas of what I would like to do next, but that's going to be kind of a different project. So I need to gather some resources and do some tests before that. My name's Ethan Leach, and for all of us here at BBSN Productions, good night and good talk.